That weekend, I thought it would just be about feeding my teenage grandson, keeping him entertained, and maybe watching a movie or two together. But somewhere between the quiet moments and the unspoken glances, something unexpected happened. Something that changed the way I saw him and maybe even myself. You won't believe what came out of that weekend. Before I tell you, let me know in the comments. From which city are you watching us right now? My name is Lon. I'm 74 and I've lived in this house for over 40 years. It's the kind of place where the furniture feels like part of the family, and the wooden floors creak in all the same spots they always have. The walls hold so many memories that sometimes I catch myself tracing my fingers along the faded paint, as if I can touch the past. Min, my grandson, is 16, tall, lanky, and at that stage where his voice is still settling into something deeper. His parents had a short trip planned for the weekend, so they asked if he could stay with me. I said yes without hesitation. I've always enjoyed having him around, though lately with school and friends, he hasn't been visiting as much. He'd arrived on a Friday evening, carrying a backpack slung over one shoulder, his hair slightly messy from the wind. I noticed right away how much taller he'd gotten since the last time I'd seen him up close. There was something about the way he carried himself now, more confident, yet still shy around the edges. The first night was easy. We had dinner together, roast chicken, mashed potatoes and green beans from the garden. He ate like he hadn't seen a real home-cooked meal in weeks, which made me smile. Afterward, we sat in the living room, a soft yellow lamp casting its light over us. I knit while he scrolled through his phone, occasionally showing me a funny video or a picture from his friends. It wasn't until later, when we were both winding down, that I noticed the way he looked at me sometimes, not in a strange or inappropriate way, but with a sort of focus that made me wonder what he was thinking. I brushed it off as teenage curiosity and went to bed. Saturday was warm for early spring, the kind of day where the sunlight seems to seep into your skin. We decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood. He kept pace beside me, sometimes kicking at loose stones on the sidewalk, sometimes asking me about my younger days. His questions surprised me, not just the usual, "What was it like back then?" but deeper ones. "What made you happiest when you were my age?" he asked at one point. I had to stop for a moment. "Reading," I said finally, and feeling like the world was still wide open. He nodded like he understood, though part of me wondered how much a 16-year-old could truly grasp about decades of living. Still, there was an attentiveness in his eyes I wasn't used to from him. That evening we baked cookies together. A simple recipe I'd used since his mother was a child. I showed him how to measure the flour properly, leveling it with the flat edge of a knife. He leaned in close to watch the warmth from the oven filling the kitchen, the smell of sugar and butter wrapping around us like a blanket. As we waited for the cookies to bake, we stood side by side, talking about nothing and everything. He told me about his struggles in math class, about a friend he missed because they'd moved away, and about how he sometimes felt like people expected him to be more grown-up than he was ready for. Something about his honesty touched me. I could feel this unspoken bridge forming between us, not just grandmother and grandson, but two people meeting each other in a quiet, unguarded space. That night, long after we'd cleaned up the kitchen and turned off the lights, I sat in my bedroom thinking about our conversations. There was a warmth in my chest I couldn't quite explain, as if Min had shown me a small window into his world, and in doing so, reminded me of parts of myself I'd forgotten. I didn't know yet what Sunday would bring, but I had a feeling it would be different. Something was shifting between us, something subtle but undeniable. The next morning, I woke up with sun already falling across the quilt in long stripes. The house warm with a hush that only happens when another person is still sleeping under your roof. I listened for Min. No footsteps yet, so I tiptoed into the kitchen and put on coffee. The kettle made its familiar soft rattle on the burner. I whisked batter for pancakes because it felt like a small ceremony, a way to tell him without words, "You are welcome here." He patted in a few minutes later, hair askew, t-shirt rumpled, foam dangling from 2 fingers like he'd fallen asleep with it. "Morning, Grandma," he said, voice thick with sleep but deeper than I remembered. He set the phone face down, which I noticed. That small act felt like a gift in itself. We ate at the tiny pine table by the window, sunlight catching the powdered sugar like mist over the plate. He drowned his pancakes in maple syrup, grinning when I pretended to scold him about cavities. While we ate, he told me about the film club he just joined, how they watched classic movies and learned how to edit on school laptops. We're making these short documentaries, he said. As lighting like stories about real people. The teacher says it's about finding a truth even in small things. He looked at me then in that attentive way that made me straighten my shoulders. I was thinking about asking you if I could interview you this weekend if that's okay. I laughed unexpectedly shy. I'm not sure I'm very interesting. You are, he said. Simple as that. You always are. We decided to take the idea slowly. No rush, no pressure. So after breakfast, we took a bus to the Saturday market by the river. The day had that early spring bravado, gulls swooping over the water, vendors calling out the names of apples like poetry. I bought a bunch of lilacs because their scent folds the years in half for me. And Min picked out a loaf of dark bread from a baker with flour on his nose. He teased me until I tried a slice right there on the sidewalk, and we shared it in strips like two conspirators. Back home we set the lilacs in a chipped blue vase. The house changed with the scent. He asked where I kept the photo albums, and I found them in the hall closet behind the winter scarves. We sat cross-legged on the rug, turning pages, the plastic film lifting with that crisp sound of old memories coming up for air. His face softened when he saw pictures of his mother with pigtails and scabbed knees, and then my husband, his grandfather, in a suit too large for him, holding a fishing rod and grinning like a boy pretending to be a man. You miss him, Min said. It wasn't a question. Every day, I answered. The words sat between us, not heavy, just true. He traced a fingertip over his grandfather's face without touching the page. I have these moments, he said, voice lower now, when I'm with my friends or at practice and out of nowhere my chest gets tight like I can't hold the whole world in. He stared at the picture for a long breath. I didn't know who to say that to. The kettle began to sing and broke the quiet in a merciful way. I made tea while he stayed with the album, and when I brought the mugs back, I found him with his head bowed, not in sadness exactly, but in that posture people have when they're choosing honesty over silence. I set his cup in front of him, and because it felt right, I touched his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned the smallest fraction into my palm. You don't have to hold the whole world, I said. Just the part that's truly yours. And what if I don't know which part that is yet? Then it's a very good weekend to start finding out. After lunch, clouds gathered like a gray shawl around the sky, and a breeze slipped through the kitchen window. Min asked if he could record my voice for a test. Just rude tone and a few words, I promise. For his documentary. He set his phone on a stack of cookbooks and sat across from me with that sweet awkwardness of someone trying to be professional without quite knowing how. Just say your name and maybe something you tell your younger self. I stared past him at the lilacs and felt a ripple of nerves that made me want to laugh. All right, I said. The foam's red dot glowed. My name is Lon. I would tell my younger self that patience is not the same as waiting. Patience is an action. It's the practice of staying open. My voice trailed off. And I would add that love is more verbs than nouns. He nodded serious like I'd said something worth keeping. That's really good, he murmured. Can you say the last part again? He pressed the button. I repeated it slower. When he played it back, my voice sounded both older and stronger than it does inside my head, the way a well-worn violin sounds when you bow a single note in an empty room. The storm finally came. A tapering rain that grew all at once into a proper downpour. The lights flickered, went dark, then returned. We decided to make soup. He chopped carrots with a concentration that made me proud. Each slice the same thickness, while I browned onions until the kitchen smelled like comfort. At one point he lifted the lid to stir, and steam fogged his glasses. We laughed helplessly at how he looked, and when he wiped them clean with the hem of his shirt, the moment felt so ordinary it became sacred. While the soup simmered, he opened his backpack and pulled out a little microphone and a coil of wire, the kind of earnest equipment that says, I'm trying. He clipped it to my cardigan. You don't have to say anything you don't want to, he said. The idea is I want to learn the map of you, not the big headline stuff. The small roads. The small roads. I repeated, tasting the phrase. Outside, rain rattled the gutters. Inside, the clock ticked softly. I told him about the way my mother folded towels into thirds and stacked them with the hems facing in. I told him about the sound of ice cracking on the pond when I was a child, how we were not allowed to skate until my father declared it safe by stamping his heel and listening. I told him how his grandfather wrote his to-do lists on the backs of envelopes, and how I kept one in a book, because it still carried the faint smell of his pipe tobacco. As I spoke, I watched Min's face soften into that expression I've only seen a few times since he was small, the look of being entirely present. He switched off the mic and exhaled. "I didn't know stories could be like this," he said quietly. "Like a room you enter and when you leave you're not the same shape." I felt my throat tighten. "They can," I said, "but only if the door swings both ways." The electricity had cubed a final time and went out. So we set candles on the table, short, fat ones that flickered like they were overtaken by their home joy. And we ate the soup in that patient light. Rain softened to a steady hush. He asked me if grief changes or just changes us. I told him I didn't know and that the not knowing is a kind of answer we carry forward anyway. When the power returned, we washed dishes together, sleeves rolled up, the sink a small chaos of bubbles and spoons. He took a breath like someone lining up for a high dive. "There's something else," he said. "Dad and we've been arguing. I mean, not yelling, just I feel like he only sees the version of me from 2 years ago. Who I was then. I keep trying to explain how I'm different now, but the words feel wrong in my mouth." I dried my hands and turned to him fully. "Sometimes love looks exactly like that," I said, seeing someone's past self so clearly that it blurs the present. "It doesn't mean you're invisible. It means you might have to help him look again." "How?" "By living the truth of who you are now calmly, consistently. By letting your choices make the case for you." I touched the edge of his sleeve, just a light tap. "And by being patient without waiting." He considered that, then gave a short laugh of disbelief. "You really do talk like a documentary." "You asked for the small roads," I said. Late in the evening, he asked if we could record one more thing. A lullaby my mother used to hum. I hadn't thought of it in years, but the melody rose up as if it had been sleeping shallowly, waiting for a knock. I hummed while he held the phone between us like a candle. The notes were uneven, but the air seemed to gather itself around the sound. When I finished, he blinked and looked away, swallowing hard. "Thank you," he said. "I think I needed that more than I knew." We sat there for a while, not talking, the room dim except for the oven's little amber clock. I could feel something true settling into place between us. Respect with a spine. Affection that asked nothing it didn't offer back. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even particularly grand, but it was new and it was ours. When he finally stood to head to bed, he paused in the doorway. "Tomorrow," he said, "do you think we could go to the park by the old library? I want to try filming in the morning light. Maybe you could read a page from your favorite book. I can cut it into the short." I felt the unexpected bloom then, a mix of pride and a tender ache. "Yes," I said. "Tomorrow we'll do that." He nodded and disappeared down the hall. I blew out the candles one by one, the wicks whispering their small good nights. As I rinsed the last teacup, I realized the weekend had shifted while we were busy noticing each other. The unexpected thing wasn't a single moment or confession. It was how being fully seen can change the shape of a house, of a day, of a heart. And I went to bed with the gentle certainty that Sunday would carry us the rest of the way. Sunday morning came wrapped in a soft, purely light, the kind that makes the world look quieter than it is. I woke before Min again, pulled on a cardigan, and stood by the window for a while, watching the street come alive. The air smelled faintly of wet pavement from last night's rain, and somewhere a bird was rehearsing its first song of the day. I made tea instead of coffee, thinking the gentler start might suit us both. When Min emerged, hair still tousled, he smiled in that half-sleep way that reminds me he's still more boy than man. "You're up early," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I wanted to see the light before it changed," I replied. "You said you wanted to film in it." He grinned. "Let's go before it gets too bright." We packed the essentials. His camera, the Leo Mick, my favorite book, an old worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with pages so thin they whisper when you turn them. The park was just a 10-minute walk, but we took our time breathing in the crisp air, stepping over puddles that reflected the pale sky. When we arrived, the benches were slick with dew, so we found a dry spot under the old oak tree by the library fence. The branches arched over us like a green cathedral ceiling. Min set up his camera with careful hands, testing the angle, adjusting the tripod legs so it wouldn't wobble. "Okay," he said, clipping the mic to my sweater. "Just start when you're ready." I opened the book to a page I knew almost by heart. My voice felt different out there in the open air, weaving through the rustle of leaves. As I read, Min's eyes flicked between me and the small screen, and I caught that same look from Friday night, the one that made me feel like my words were landing somewhere safe. When I finished, he lowered the camera but didn't speak right away. Then he said softly, "That was exactly what I was hoping for." We sat for a while, not rushing back. I told him stories about coming to this park with his mother when she was little, how she used to run between the swings and the sandbox in endless loops until she finally collapsed in the grass. He listened, smiling, and then shared a story from his own life about a friend who had moved away last year, and how the empty space in his days still felt strange. There was no grand advice from me this time, just a quiet acknowledgement. "It's okay to miss someone and still keep going," I said. "Sometimes missing them becomes part of the going." On the walk home, we stopped by the corner cafe for 2 hot chocolates. The steam curled up between us as we walked, and I noticed how naturally our steps fell in rhythm now, as if we'd been walking side by side for years instead of just this weekend. Back at the house, Min asked if we could go through the footage together. We sat up at the dining table, his laptop open between us. As he clicked through the clips, I saw myself on the screen, hair wind-tossed, cardigan sleeves pushed up, eyes lit in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. It was strange and a little humbling to see myself through his lens. "You make me look better than I am," I teased. He shook his head. "No, I just show what's already there." The afternoon drifted by in the easy way it does when you're in good company. We baked another batch of cookies, more for the comfort of the act than for the sweets themselves. Later, while the sun sank low and painted the kitchen in gold, Min recorded a short piece for his film. Just him talking about the weekend, what he'd learned, how he'd felt. He didn't ask me to stay, but I lingered in the doorway, catching bits of his words, how we think we know people. But then you listen long enough and you realize there's so much more. Dinner was simple. Leftover soup, thick slices of the bread we bought at the market, and lilacs still fresh enough to scent the room. I felt the hours slipping faster now, each one marking the end of our time together. After we washed the last dish, Min went to pack. I heard the soft sounds of zippers and folding fabric from the guest room. And then he came to stand in the living room doorway, backpack over his shoulder. "I'm glad we did this," he said. "So am I replied. "More than you know." We hugged. No rush, no awkwardness, just that rare kind of embrace that holds both goodbye and thank you in the same breath. I walked him to the door, watching him head down the steps toward his father's waiting car. He turned once to wave and I waved back, the air around me suddenly still. When I went back inside, the house felt different. Not emptier, warmer, somehow, as if the weekend had left behind a layer of quiet connection in the walls. I glanced at the vase of lilacs, at the cookbook still stacked where the camera had rested, at the book on the table with its frayed edges. The unexpected thing, I realized, wasn't any single conversation or shared laugh. It was this. The way a weekend can take 2 people, even family, and give them a new way of seeing each other, and maybe, if we're lucky, of seeing ourselves. I made myself a cup of tea before bed, letting the steam rise and curl into the room. Tomorrow would be ordinary again, but I knew without a doubt that Min and I would carry this weekend with us, each in our own quiet way. And sometimes that's more than